back this week because after listening to Joe sit in my chair, I was like, shit, I'm going to be out of a job soon. So I had to run back here and make sure I cleared my calendar. I was after Wharf last week, and I was still making my way back from Atlanta and went to Asheville with my son. But Joe did a great job subbing in for me. So thank Joe. Don't ever do that again because I'll never be invited back.
Yeah, you were almost Wally pipped right there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, no, I had fun with Joe, but I wanted you to come back, and we're going to talk about what you were doing last weekend, what I was doing this weekend, which were the Earth League drafts. You had the Wharf League draft, which is the Waffle House area fantasy league, and I had the Barth, which is the Bay Area Roto Fantasy League. So we're going to kind of just break down our teams because, as you pointed out to me, and I hadn't even noticed this yet until we started talking before you hit the record button, you and I drafted two teams that are completely unique. We don't have a single overlapping player. Not that we didn't try to get some of the same players, but we had zero overlapping players, which makes for interesting discussion about kind of our strategy going in, roster construction, and things like that, and how we end up liking our teams. So
I thought that was crazy. As much time as you and I spend together, we talk and, listening to you and Paul during the week. And so I'm just stunned that we each drafted 30 different players and we didn't have one single. I mean, you were drafting 8th. I was drafting 13th. But what are the odds of that happening?
I think they're pretty low, especially considering we tend to like a lot of the same players. So obviously there are going to be certain players that one of us likes quite a bit more than another, or maybe a case
or
of
dislikes.
Yes, such as Schwellenbach, where I love him and you are not in on him at all. But it is fairly weird to see that neither of us draft the same player, because I'm sure we're going to have drafts when we get to things like TGFBI and labor and tout and stuff like that, where we have very similar looking rosters. So this will be a fun episode to discuss. Let's first jump in and talk about our minor news and their minor league deals. Mark Canha and Manny Margot both go to the Brewers. I'm a little surprised that Mark Canha didn't get a major league deal somewhere. I'm not super surprised about Margot. Any fantasy impact you see for these guys?
So I was looking at this. I mean, you and Paul, I believe it was you and Paul, were just talking during the third base episode preview. I forget which stands of it, but you basically were like the NL. No, you were talking about on TikTok how the NL Central is so wide open. Every single team has a chance. You were making the argument. It's like Milwaukee definitely has a chance. But one of the things that stunned me when I saw this was like, okay, the average team age is like barely drinking age. There are so many young guys on this team. And maybe this was a matter of Christian Yelich and Rhys Hoskins saying, hey, Mark Antonazio, I forget exactly how to pronounce his name. We could use a couple of guys that are at least 28 years old to help us with some veteran influence on this roster. Can we get a chance? And so when I look at that, I'm looking over at their depth chart and I see it's like, okay, if you've got Mark Canha and Manny Margot coming into camp, where does that look? Because their bench, Jason Martinez already has Canha on the bench as a first base outfield. And then you have Tyler Black and you have Caleb Durbin. And I believe, Durbin's still got a very good shot at third base because Oliver Dunn is not the answer. And so that's there. And I'm trying to think with Sal Frelick could be in the strict platoon. I'm just not sure where that gets, but one of these guys, I don't expect both of them to make it, but one of them could make it. And I would say Canha over Margot, and Margot is what he is. He only hits lefties. That's it. And he plays a passable defense. It's not as good as it once was, but it's still theirs. But maybe this is one of those opportunities where he's in camp with Milwaukee and opts out and finds another deal elsewhere by the end of camp. The good news is he's in a camp. That's going to help him get started.
Yeah, Blake Perkins fractured his shin this last week too, I believe. So he's probably going to miss a good amount of time. And I think that is one of the reasons why they went out and made these deals is they need another guy who can play the outfield. Canha and Margot make a lot of sense. I think Canha will find his way into a roster spot for sure. And the question is, like, how much playing time will he get? This is a young team. But that being said, I mean, Garrett Mitchell always gets hurt. We don't know what Christian Yelich's health situation is really going to look like as we start getting closer to the season. So I think there will be opportunities, especially for Canha to play, and honestly for Margot to at least make this team, because who knows, if something happens to Garrett Mitchell, like who's going to play center on this team?
Right.
Margot can, but a number of these other guys probably can't. So I'm not drafting him anywhere outside of DC's, but yeah.
And DC draft season's almost over anyhow.
Yeah, we're getting close. So
yeah.
Let's move it right along into kind of our discussion about the Earth draft breakdowns. These are mostly industry league, though there are a lot of players in these leagues that aren't in the industry. Started with the Earth or the Barf League about 7 or 8 years ago now. I started it, and we had guys like Ray Flowers and Laura Michaels and Sammy Reed and Doug Thorburn, and it was a really, really fun way of kind of, for me, getting a home league together, because my old home league had kicked me out by that point. And so, but a few years later, we started seeing all these other Earth League pop up in places like New England and now in the Great Lakes and in your area, which is kind of the southeastern part of the country, the Waffle House area league, my favorite. So let's talk about your team and kind of what you did. What was your strategy coming in?
So and by the way, before I forget, did you see where Glarf drafted yesterday?
Did they draft a Comiskey?
Comerica.
Comerica.
They drafted a Comerica. I thought that was awesome.
The Glarf
League, they had theirs yesterday.
Yeah, the Glarf League, they take this really seriously. So there's an overall competition, obviously, for the person who does the best out of all of the Earth League drafts. But there's also an overall league competition in which we measure each league's competitiveness versus each other. And Glarf has won that every single year. They take this really seriously. They move locations every year because the Great Lakes area is such a big spot. They've had it in Cleveland. They've had it in Detroit. I believe next year they're going to be in Indianapolis. And they've had it in Chicago. So it's a really, really cool. They are really into it, and I made an impassioned plea to my league, the Barf League, to hey, let's stop this whole, if we're not doing well, we're not paying attention as much, because it brings down the whole league. We can't be competitive with Glarf. So my hope is that my league, because I love Dave McDonald. Him and I record on the Friends of Fantasy Benefits podcast. He is the commissioner of Glarf, but he talks a lot of shit, and I'm tired of having to hear Glarf is winning. Well, yeah, there's only so much I can do, but so I'm hoping we're gonna be more competitive.
It's an active topic in the Wharf Discord channel. It is something that we try to hold each other accountable to hey, keep doing what you're doing. I would also say, by the way, for those viewing on YouTube, we have the best league trophy, and it's not even close. And so I'm going to put a picture of Morgan, who won our league. So there's his trophy, and that's in Bart, who made that. We're looking to get an actual Waffle House plate next year to get that, but that is the trophy. So that is who I got the draft next to. The crazy part is last year I drafted between Morgan, who won the league, and Bart Perry, who's a really good player. And this year I drafted between those same two guys, even though last year I believe we were 6, 7, 8. This year we were 12, 13, and 14. But in between the same two guys, once again, on things. Bart and I spent a lot of time in Joe Sheehan's fantasy baseball sub Slack channel, I guess you would call it. So we spent some time in there talking. So it's one of those, as you and I were saying, if we spend enough time together, you're on the same types of players. And yeah, so it was a fun draft in Milton, Georgia. And so second year in a row, we've had it there, and good times. We had 11 of the 15 people were live. We have somebody who drives all the way from Port St. Lucie up. So that's the furthest distance. And we have somebody else who comes from Tennessee. And then I come from Charlotte. A lot of the area is, a lot of the folks are in Georgia, but pretty spread out.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with Barf. Unfortunately, Sammy Reed couldn't join us this year, but we had, Sarah, Jake Crumpler, Bubba Entrikin, Doug Thorburn, Jason Anthony, He was just Howard Bender, so. And we get together at the rec room every year in San Francisco, which was an absolute blast. So let's jump into these. Let's talk about your team. What was the strategy coming in? You're drafted from the 13th spot. Did you want to draft from the 13th spot, or was that just kind of where you ended up?
No, it was like my sixth preference, if I remember correctly from setting KDS. I think it was like my sixth preference, but at least it wasn't on the absolute end, because I have picked 14th, I have picked 15th, and so I was trying to avoid that. I just don't like picking on the elbows, the turn of the elbow, however which way you want to go. I like closer. I don't want to wait as long because sometimes it forces you into some things, which kind of happened rather early in this one. But I picked 13 and tried to make the most of it out of that. I just wanted to try to grab as much offense as I could. I just remember, my plan was grab the offense, get the pitching targets I want, wait on relievers, stay out of tier 1, and try to incrementally build from there. So that was the overall strategy.
And then let's talk about your let's talk about how the team came together. You start off with your draft and you take Vlad Guerrero, 13th overall. Love it. You wrap around, you get Bryce Harper, 18th, Dylan Cease in the 3rd round, CJ Abrams in the 4th round, and Robert Suarez in the 5th round. Was that what you had planned out?
For the most part, for those watching on YouTube, I'm going to go ahead and share the board so you guys can see where things are. And so Vlad was what I was hoping to get for pick 1. Now I would say pick 2 is I wanted one of Lindor or Churio, figuring, okay, one of those guys has got to come back. Well, no, they both went. And so honestly, right out of the gate, I mean, how many times do you see a guy take 2 first basemen like I did, taking Vlad and then going Bryce Harper? Because the decision point was, okay, that was the skill set I was looking at. And then next up on that skill set would have been Jarren Duran or trade. The decision point I went through was Jazz, Turner, or Durant, this trio that went right here at 6, 7, 8. And I was trying to be risk adverse. And Durant was fun last year when I got him where I got him. Turner and Chisholm, I need to see it happen. I need the health grade. I want to see where things can go. And so I almost went Turner. And then at the last second, I was like, you know what? Forget it. Screw it. I'm going this direction. And that's how I ended up with Harper there. So like second round, that's what happened for me. And I had that. And then I knew I was going to have to do some stuff with steals. But Cease, absolutely. Suarez wasn't the target. But if you can see as that particular went through, by that time, we'd already lost Hader, Clase, Diaz, Williams, Iglesias, Mason Miller, Ryan Helsley, Andres Munoz, who I would have loved to have at that point, and Joan Duran. So Suarez was the 10th guy off the board at that point. And that's why it ended up being Suarez, because after that, my thoughts on Felix Bautista. And then it would have been kicking the can down. The next would have been Ryan Walker was around there. So Suarez was just, I wanted to take a closer in the first 5 rounds. And that's who was still there for me. That's not the guy I wanted, but that's what the market left.
Did you pick up like a Jason Adam later on, just in case, Suarez is traded and not in a closer role?
100% did. 24th round. He was the first reserve pick I made. So in case he gets traded, I also did that with Andrew Kittredge very late, because if he can get a couple of saves out of the gate, if Bautista's not ready to go, otherwise he's an easy cut. So that's why he's 29th. But I absolutely took Adam in case San Diego went another direction. I mean, I don't believe the Nick Pivetta signing had happened at that point. So we didn't know if San Diego was going to start selling guys off or whatnot. So I took Suarez, but that also was like, I'm going to take at least one reliever spec at the end. And Jason Adam was the first. I prioritized taking him in the reserves.
Nice. Let's talk about some of the guys you were above ADP on, where you kind of went for the reach. You just talked about Suarez, but you also took Lane Thomas in the 9th round at pick 133. He went 185 in Barf. Why are you so high on Lane Thomas? Because he's a guy that I have been kind of avoiding. I'm a little afraid that the speed completely dried up once he got to Cleveland.
Yeah, and that's definitely a risk. It was a profile thing. When I looked at it, I was looking for another type of guy for speed, because if you look through the first few rounds, if I let me do what they call the embiggen stuff. Here we go. Let me embiggen it a little bit. So I have CJ Abrams and I have Marcus Simeon at this point. At that turn, I'm like, okay, what else can I do? I had taken Riley Green, and then I was looking at what else could I take here. Randy Rosarena went the pick before me to Morgan. He was somebody I would have considered, and then when I looked at it, I wanted another guy. Adolis Garcia was there. I felt it was way too early for Josh. It's like, okay, then I'm down to Lane Thomas and Josh Lowe. Now it's like, it's too early for both of them. Which way am I going to go? And I felt a little better about Thomas. So I went the Thomas direction here because I was looking for a specific skill set from outfield because I had not taken an outfielder yet. I mean, we were all the way down here into round 8, and I had just taken my first outfielder. And that was a discussion point because if you look at the teams around me, Morgan took one early and then didn't take one again to Rosarena. And then Bart didn't take one until we got down to Colton Cowser in the 11th round, but he stayed out of the outfield and was chasing it later.
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned on Lane Thomas. Like I said, the stolen bases drying up for me is just a little bit scary moving from a team like Washington that just runs a ton to a team like Cleveland that's a little bit more mid-pack in that regard. But I can understand, like, there were definitely some moments in the Bart draft that we'll talk about here in a minute that where I was like, oh my God, like all these special pitchers, like, just went flying off the board. Like,
yeah, I got questions about that.
Yeah, like it was insane and kind of forced a few of us to, like I said, we'll talk about here in a little bit, but it forced a few of us to kind of go, well, I guess we're going heavy hitting. You know, like me, you know, and Howard Bender were all just like, I guess we're just not getting the pitchers we want to get because guys were just flying off the board. The next guy I want to talk about with you is you took Hunter Goodman fairly. I love this, and Hunter Goodman was actually a guy I had kind of circled on my draft sheet as my catcher too, but he went earlier in my draft than I had kind of expected. Why are you high on Hunter Goodman?
So again, looking at what happened around that spot. So I had waited for second catcher. I was looking at that point. Honestly, the target was Felix Fermin, and Fermin had already gone. I'm trying to remember where he had. That was who I was looking at. So if I can pull up, actually, I was wrong. Felix Fermin had not gone. But when I looked at it, I had taken a look. I wanted to get there because I was worried that catcher towards that end, there was a lot of teams that were still looking for second catcher. And once Jonah Heim went there on the turn, I was like, okay, maybe that is the tipping point here. And then Naylor had gone, Bailey went, and then it didn't happen. So it was more of a spec play. It's like, okay, what do I like the best out of the rest of this? And it was too early for either guy. You know, for me, would have been super early at that point. So I went with, if I'm going to go early for a catcher, I might as well go with the one who's got the most upside. And that's why I went Goodman there. And if he doesn't get the, you know, if he's not going to get enough playing time, and, you know, I pick up a catcher off reserve in Fab, and I throw that in there. So we'll see where that goes. But the other piece of that, the thing I really wanted to do, and that's where Bart got me, was he went back to back. He went Perez Contreras on catcher. Didn't expect that. I was all set to take Contreras in the 6th round, as I had in another draft. And maybe that's why he ended up taking it there too. But that was one of the early times where I got snaked there, because that's my plan. I would have felt in the other league that the First Pitch Arizona Speakers League, I have Contreras and I have Goodman there too. And I felt better about taking him there because I've got all those plate appearances from Contreras, so I could take a little more risk at catcher. And in that draft and hold format there, I also have Jacob Stallings, so it's pretty easy. If Goodman's not playing early, I'll just put Stallings in my lineup there. So I have a little more flexibility. I have more risk here in Wharf because different format.
Yeah. Next guy on the list that I really want to talk about, David Robertson, was one of your biggest reaches versus ADP. You took him at pick 313 when his ADP is 429. That's 116 picks above ADP. Was it just kind of how quick closers went that you kind of went that direction, or do you think that Robertson's going to end up in a job?
The skills are too good not to end up with the job. That's and for him not to go back to Texas almost seems crazy at this point. But I continue to take Robertson because it's like, if he goes undrafted, and he doesn't have a job by the start of camp, and then he comes and then he gets a job and he's named a closer, you're going to spend a lot of fab on him. So I figure at this point, we're at the 21st round when they ended up taking him. And it was, okay, do I look at him? I mean, look at some of the guys that went after. All the closer specs were mostly gone. I would have taken Calvin Fauché had he made it to me. That was the intention, honestly, was I was looking at Chris Martin and Calvin Fauché, and they both went earlier in that round. So after that, I was like, yeah, yes, I've got Bednar. Yes, I've got Suarez. Do I feel terrific about that? No. And so I was like, okay, who's got the best chance of getting a job and getting that role later? Because again, Martin and Fauché were the two guys. I wanted one of those two guys in that round, and neither of them made it. And maybe that's the price for taking Hunter Goodman too early, is I lost out on that.
Yeah, I know that we had closers really not go off the board very early. Like, it was surprising. We'll talk about it like as for me, because I end up with Class A, I think in the 4th round of my draft. Yeah, in the 4th round, which I wasn't expecting at all. I expected a closer to make it to me in the 4th round that I wanted, but I didn't expect it to be Class A. But then closers just went really, really fast, and I was left in a situation, which I'll talk about, where I did not end up with a second closer that I was excited about. So, yeah, I think this is definitely a year where closers are going to go fast, especially those closer twos. So you got to kind of make a plan to potentially jump guys a little bit earlier than you might in previous years. Then the next guy you took above ADP was Noel. You took him at 318. His ADP is 388. What was your thinking there?
Late power. When we're talking 22nd round, a guy that's got 25 plus homer upside, I'll take that all day long. And again, it was outfield. I needed outfield. We talked about how outfield had been drying up. If you look at some of the outfielders that went later, some of the ones that went just in front of, we really didn't have. We had that Byron Buxton, Wilyer Abreu, Heston Kierstad. I'm fine. I'm missing out on all those. The other piece was Jacob Young going just in front. If Jacob Young had made it to me, I took Suarez because I really like Suarez still. Ranger Suarez still sitting in the 19th, but Jacob Young is somebody I absolutely would have taken in the 20th for that speed, because overall I still feel I don't have enough speed on the team, and maybe I have too much power at this point with that. So Noel is one I looked at, and then I grabbed Varsho as just some of the best remaining outfielder for me, because I can't. I think in a drafted hold, I do have Noel and Encarnacion on the same roster, but you really can't carry both those risks with situations. So I was just trying for most upside at that point, and then Austin Hayes in the reserve in case. Right now, off the bat, Austin Hayes has got to cover Dalton Varsho, who's not going to be ready to start the season.
Yeah, he's going to probably miss the first month of the season. All right, then let's see. Anybody else that we need to talk about in terms of reaches?
No, I could, if I switch the tab, this is the report I put together, and it's like some of the other ones, but it's the reserves. I mean, some of the red, I have those big three, but Jason Adam, but again, that we talked about how that dictated. I think my favorite one in the reserve was getting Ryan Nelson, almost 40 picks at, I got him at 408. He went 370 at Barf. And so Ryan Nelson's been a target of mine for the last couple. I didn't start drafting until this month, but I've had a few drafts. So this whole entire month, Ryan Nelson's been a target of mine. And I was really happy to get him where I got him.
All right. Let's talk about some of the guys you got that were kind of values, comparatively speaking, to ADP. We'll start off with Taj Bradley. He dropped in my draft too, which was a little bit surprising to me. Why were you going for Taj Bradley? No fears about the new stadium?
Somewhat, but the funny thing is, I told the room, please take him so I don't have to. And I said that for 2 rounds. And then finally I was like, all right, I guess I'm just going to take him. So I took him 223, which would have been the 15th round, but in the 13th, I was like, somebody please save me from myself and take Taj Bradley. I don't want to take him. And then 14th goes by and 15th goes by. He's still sitting there. I'm like, okay, I'll take him. Yeah, I do have concerns about the about playing in Steinbrenner Field and what's going to happen. And is he as dominant as he was for that stretch of the summer last year? No. Is he as bad as he was for that August? Absolutely not. There's some sweetness in the middle of that, and that's what I'm hoping for here. But at this point, at this price, I have no problem with it. I dared the league to take him from me. They didn't, so I was like, okay, I'm just going to go ahead and take him. I would love for this to work out, along with that Nick Lodolo pick right after it. So a lot of strikeouts there, but obviously the risks are associated there too.
Yeah, I was tempted to take him in our draft as well. He went at, I believe, pick 205, and I was like, why is he still on the board here? And there were a number of starting pitchers that just stuck around for quite a while and kind of made some bargains at points. So I think if he drops outside of the top 200, like that's a pretty decent value, and I'm willing to take that gamble there because I think the upside.
His ADP the last 2 weeks has been 198.
Yeah, the upside is still there on a guy like Taj Bradley. I know it's going to be a much more difficult stadium for him to navigate, but growth isn't linear. Let's not kind of pigeonhole him into the guy that he has been early on in his career, because I think there is still a ton of talent there. All right, let's talk about Ranger Suarez. You got him at pick 283. ADP is 263. I think that's a really smart pick, and he was definitely a guy that was on my board that went before I was able to get him. What were your thoughts there?
My thoughts were he shouldn't have been. He still should not have been on the board at that point. That was really my biggest thought, and it all comes back to team context. Philly should be a really good team, and for a starting pitcher of his abilities and some of the growth that he showed to still be there, almost 2 rounds past his ADP. That, to me, I just looked at it and said, this is too good to pass up. I'll make adjustments afterwards. But I wasn't a guy that I was targeting. But if Bradley fell a little bit comparative to ADP, and Suarez was the other guy I saw sitting there and said, this is a pick I got to pull the trigger on.
Yeah, I felt like that was a really nice deal for you. I think Suarez is one of those guys that, especially if your whip is already taken care of, I think you're gonna be okay. You also took Yamamoto at pick 78. I'm a little surprised that he fell that far in this draft. He went to pick 61 in Barth.
Yeah, and his ADP is 60. I was surprised that he was still sitting there. And maybe it's because everybody believes the Dodgers are going to have an 18-man rotation and nobody's going to throw more than 100 innings. And I get all that. But when you look to see the pitchers that were still going, the starters that were drafted before him, Garrett Cole, then we get to Michael King, we get to Jacob deGrom, we get to Framber Valdez, Pablo Lopez. I mean, that's kind of the gap. And then after I took Yamamoto, then it was Peralta, then it was Imanaga, then it was Bryce Miller and Hunter Brown. So it kind of kicked off a step. I really strongly considered taking Hunter Brown here. But if I'm going to write a bold prediction and say that I feel that Yamamoto could win the Cy Young this year, then I have to take him. It's a kind of being chicken shit. He could win the Cy Young, but I'm gonna go ahead and take Hunter Brown when Yamamoto's already fallen this far in the room. I'm taking the guy that I said I feel has a good chance of winning the Cy Young this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big Yamamoto guy this year. I'm a little afraid of the injuries from last season. I don't know what the 6-man rotation is going to look like. That being said, it picked 78. That feels like a really, really good value, and I probably would have gone the same way as you did at that point. So for me, I absolutely love this pick, in spite of the fact of not loving the guy. But that made a lot of sense. All right, let's talk about some guys that you got above where Barf took them. Maybe not the biggest bargains via ADP, but I really wanted Brandon Pfaadt. I think he fit perfectly into my team, and I got sniped on him in my draft. But you didn't. Where are you at on Brandon Pfaadt this year?
I love the growth. I love that he doesn't walk people and he doesn't kill himself in that capacity. And in a team context, I like Arizona quite a bit this year as well. So a lot of the conditions, and again, he was right. Yeah, by market, he was at ADP. In Barf, he went higher. I mean, you guys paid. I was able to get him right at value. So it wasn't like it was a value piece. It was, I'm looking for starting pitcher. That's the pocket. that he's in. But we'll talk about, where you guys are. But before, the starters that went just before Fott and mine were Jack Flaherty, Christopher Sanchez, Ryan Pepio, and Kevin Gossman, and Robbie Ray. Now, Robbie Ray, it's another area where Bart snapped, because I would have taken Robbie Ray. That's why I was trying to make my decision. I want Fott or I want Ray. I said I'll take Ray first, and Ray went right before, so I ended up taking Fott.
Yeah, I mean, I love Fott. I think he made some really big strides last year. I'm looking for him to continue this year. I think this Arizona team is going to be really, really good. So I'm here for Brandon Fott being a target or a guy that you'll love coming into this year. Nolan Jones is a guy that I really faded hard last year because he was going in like the top 45 picks.
Mm-hmm.
This year feels like a little bit of a bargain, especially if he's healthy. You got him at pick 253, went 227 in BARF. Are you in on Nolan Jones, or was just this too good of value to pass up?
I'm in at the price. Again, ADP, it's a complete walk. Over the last 2 weeks, this is exactly where he's been going. But you said it earlier. He was costing third, fourth round last year, and now you could pick him up down here. If you can take a chance on a rebound down here in the 17th round, all over this. And it wasn't a target, but when I'm sitting there staring at this, like, what do I do? And then right after it was Cedric Mullins, Evan Carter, and then I followed this up with Joe Adell, who again was right there in Morph and BARF, same exact ADP, above the market price. And in this past week, we've learned that Adele's now going to play center field, and I don't know how much that moved, if that's moved anything, but to me, it was just like, I'm going for the athleticism here, and Evan Carter would have been appealing, but he didn't make it to me. But after that, it's like, I'm fine on passing on all the other guys. I was looking for a little more steals, and the power, and Adele fit the profile that I was looking for perfectly here in the 18th. But with Jones, again, anybody that was costing you a top 5 round that you could pick up after round 15 the following year, you take that chance, because if you were willing to pay a top 5 round guy just a year ago, why can't you pay a 15th, plus 15 pick and see if it's still there?
And I think this is one of those things where you really have to think about, like, hey, how many of these guys are going to be on your team after the 15th round? Most of them aren't going to be on your team the rest of the season.
Yeah.
Usually you're dropping, 80% of the people you draft in the back half of your draft. And so, like, if it doesn't work out, fine. But there's a massive amount of upside that we saw a few years ago in a guy like Nolan Jones. And so it makes a lot of sense to take that gamble. Anybody else from your team or that you want to talk about?
No, I already mentioned Ryan Nelson. That was the other guy that I was really happy to get as late as I did. But other than that, no, I don't feel great about the speed. I feel good about the run production. The steals are going to be problematic, and I should have enough pitching to keep things going. Just have to be active on free agent every week, and it's a tough league for that too. This league, WARF, is extremely active in free agency. There's a lot of sniping, a lot of somebody just $1 up somebody else, and so it's active. And I'm not looking forward to my Sunday nights being washed out again. It's been nice to have my Sunday nights to myself for a while.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Let's kind of go and talk about BARF, and I'll let you be the host. So new for the podcast, but you've got hosting experience, so go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to know what your strategy was coming into this, because when I look at this, you mentioned earlier that leagues have different people. It's like you have some, Jeopardy calls it potent potables. You have some noted notables in this league. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the pitching driving up. You have Eno in your league, and Eno writes about all of his pitchers, and you've got Howard Bender, and you've got Bubba, and you have Dalton Del Don, who plays a lot of high stakes stuff. It's like you have a lot of very experienced, knowledgeable people that put their knowledge out there for other people to consume. And everything that Doug Thorburn knows about pitching. So it's like you've got a lot of different things, and how much of that plays into the strategy that you try to come up with, knowing that you know what people are writing about and that kind of influence. How do you try to navigate all that noise as you put something together?
So I don't worry so much about the other people in my league. I mean, I definitely, if you know, a league like this where I've played with a number of these guys a bunch of times over the last, you know, decade or so, I have a better understanding of who might be going for who or who might be targeting you.
Mhm.
And, you know, obviously I listen and read a lot of the content of these guys. But ultimately, especially early on in a draft, I'm really trying to take the best values and start to construct the most balanced team possible in order to make sure that I'm, you know, kind of giving myself a lot more options. And I feel like I did that early on in this draft. You know, I took pick 8. It was my second choice on my board because I really do like being in the middle. But that I have this kind of a belief that there's really like a top 7 to 8 players this year. And I was like, okay, pick 8, I'm more than likely going to get somebody I love. And if I don't, you know, I'll reach a little bit for Francisco Lindor. But ended up with Soto at 8. And then I figured, okay, I really want a shortstop potentially here in the next few rounds and someone with speed. Trey Turner falls to me in the second round, which is perfect. And then Matt Olson kind of fell to me. I really wanted Machado, but Richard Sands,
He sniped you there.
Yeah, he sniped me right there. Or I wanted one of the pitchers to fall to me, which they did not. You know, Burns, Reagans, and Kirby all went in the early third round. I was very tempted to take Clase or Devin Williams right there because all of the starting pitcher ones that I was really, really interested in had gone at that point. But ultimately I was like, listen, last year in this league, I really struggled, not last year in this league, but last year in a number of leagues, I struggled with power. And I was like, I need to get some power and kind of make sure I'm hammering that home kind of early. And so I took Matt Olson and kind of went from there. And I really liked the start. You know, I was able to get Clase in the 4th round, which I did not expect. I think that was one of the lowest points that he has gone early in the draft. Yeah. And he was like the 3rd or 4th closer off the board. I was actually shocked that Clase fell to me at that point.
When I looked at this, the first few rounds, you know, I believe this is the first draft I've seen so far that no closer has gone in the first 3 rounds.
Yeah,
none.
It was weird. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where when I first saw the results, when I saw you, I was like, wow, he got Clase at 53. I mean, we know what I've said about Clase this offseason, but I'm even taking him if I could get him into the middle of the 4th round. I'm not passing on that because that's, you know, the safety, the 50% outcome is still too good to pass at that price. So that was one of the things that really stood out, and just how some of that pitching was flying off the board early on. And then, you know, you get back to 5 and 6. You know, if I were to have you blur the names out, be like, pick my team, I would have been like, oh, this is team 8. That's Justin. I could see Lopez, I see Ober, I see Royce Lewis, and that's enough. I would have been like, that's your team. Because those are, yeah, even in the third base preview the other day, you were saying, yeah, I'm taking my chance on Royce Lewis, and if he's there in the 8th round, I'm taking him, and that's exactly what you did. But I love the Kyle Schwarber buy in the 7th round. To market his ADP last 2 weeks was 80. You get him 98. He went 70th in WARF. I don't know what caused that to fall, but that's I get 2 bargains like this in the first 7 rounds between Clase and Schwarber is really nice.
I was really, really shocked that Schwarber was there. He wasn't a part of my plan at this point. Like, I was like, okay, you know, I've got some power and I've got good batting average. What I really need is some stolen bases. And then Schwarber kind of falls in the 7th round. And I know I'm taking Royce Lewis in the 8th. So when Schwarber falls to me in the 7th, I'm kind of just sitting there going, I think this value is too good to pass up. And I'd wanted Marcus Semien. He had gone earlier. My whole plan for round 7 kind of got messed up in round 6 because round 6 I'm coming up and I know I need a starting pitcher. But I see Marcus Semien there. I love Marcus Semien this year. And I go, okay, I'm going to take Marcus Semien in the 6th. And then in the 7th, I'm going to take Spencer Schwellenbach. Well, Schwellenbach goes in the 6th round ahead of me. And I go, okay, I need to make sure I lock down another starting pitcher here because I don't want to get back to me and I'm having to choose between like Sonny Gray and Hunter Green. So I take Ober, and then of course Semien goes, and Schwarber's still there, and I'm just like, again, a power was something I struggled with. And so last season, so I was like, you know what, I'm gonna lock down power right now. And a start of my first 7 rounds with Soto, Olsen, and Schwarber on this team, and then Royce Lewis in the 8th. Like, I feel like now the projections have me for being kind of low in power. I don't know that I am. I know I hit speed quite a bit, rest of the way, speeding batting average. But I feel pretty decent about my power. It may not win the league, but I feel like with guys like Schwarber and Olsen, I've got a really good start to a team with some good power.
So then we get to the middle pack, and when I was running the comparison data, you had your picks 13 through 17 were all well over the ADP for the guys.
Yeah.
So Michael Garcia, you took 188 as ADP. All the ADP references, by the way, folks, are the last 2 weeks. So Michael Garcia, 188 versus 214. Jose Barrios, 203 versus 241. Colt Keith, 218 versus 245. Springs 233 versus 276, and then Blade 248, 275. From listening to you earlier, it sounded like draft dynamics were really kicking in at this point.
Yeah.
But what drove this? I'm just going to start filling needs, getting guys, be damned the ADP.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. I think ADP is a really good tool in terms of giving you an idea of where a guy might go, but personally, I think ADP is fairly useless if you're using it as some sort of draft sheet or where you should be taking someone. You have to remember when ADP is compiled by every single team, which means it weights the 15th place or your last place team just as much as your first place team, because you don't know which team is going to be first or 15th. So I think ADP is something you use to like kind of gauge something like, okay, this guy's probably going to go around this pick. But like, if you just see a guy that you like or that really fits your team, and he is 20, 30, 40 picks ahead of ADP, like, just take him. If that's where you have him valued, you should take him. And that's kind of what I did in this draft. I really ignored ADP, and I will in the show notes, I will put the link to kind of the spreadsheet you built. Because I think it's a really good outline of like, hey, like, this, you see a lot of red on my sheet where I went above where Barth or where ADP was. And I'm okay with that. Like, that to me, like, yeah, I got some great values at times too, but I also really just went for the guys that I felt either fit my team well or were values to me, which is more important than I think value to ADP.
It's funny. You have a lot of red in the middle, and I have a lot of it in the back.
Yep.
I have a lot of it in the back. You said earlier that, with closer, you felt awesome about getting Class A in the 4th round, but then you didn't touch it again until the 18th when you got Liam Hendricks, and then you handcuffed with Chapman 2 rounds later. And that's kind of it for relief.
Well, I also have Liam Hendricks, so like
that's what I mean. You got the Hendricks Chapman, so you got one, but you've got the Boston and the Cleveland bullpen, and that's it. You don't have anything. You didn't even spec on a reliever in the minors and in the reserves.
Yeah, I think closer is one of the spots where I kind of messed up. I had an opportunity to take David Bednar as my closer too. Which round was that? In round 10. But I was really a little, after taking Schwarber and then Kyle Lewis, I felt a little weird about my batting average. I mean, I've got Soto, I've got Turner. I probably should have just said, hey, you know what? I don't need Stephen Kwan here. I also needed stolen bases. I can get that kind of guy later. And I should have taken Bednar there in the 10th round. I wish I had. He went the next pick, and there was a collective groan among everybody in the draft room when Bednar went, and I was like, I messed up here. So for me, this was not a perfect draft. I feel like overall, I didn't do a great job of constructing the roster the way I wanted to. It feels more like a mishmash of players as opposed to being a team that like I walk out going, oh, I feel really, really good about this.
It is. The last point I would say is we have, each of us took guys that the other draft didn't take. So, and you and Wharf took Brian Hayes, Jacob Wilson, Mike Talkman, and Trevor Rogers that we did not take in Wharf. And then I took Richie Palacios, Andrew Kittredge, and Chase Mydroth, who did not go in Barf. For me, I'll just speak on my end. I was looking at Palacios is outfield, second base eligible, and I needed another outfielder in case Noel and I know Varsho's not going to be there to start the season, so that's going to be Austin Hayes. But I need another guy to cover the outfield, and I was looking for more speed because, as you were lamenting on how you address saves, speed was my problem. And so I'm looking for a guy that, okay, he's 23 of 24 in his career in stolen bases. He just went 19 of 20 last year. I'm going to take a chance here and use that outfield eligibility early. So that's why I took him. And then with Mydroth, I already mentioned with Kittredge, if Bautista's not ready to start the season, perhaps Kittredge can get me a handful of saves early. And then finally with Mydroth, it's the White Sox are having an open audition, and he could make the team and see what happens. Otherwise, he's a really easy cut. Is the 30th round. You find him, you cut, you move on. So that's why you see a lot of my red towards the end, because it was completely looking at team need, and I didn't care. The Jason Adam one was almost dictated situation, but I didn't care about ADP after I got to past the 20th round. I'm like, I have needs, and I'm going to fill them however way I see fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, part of my problem was I double booked myself. So I scheduled Barf, and then, of course, my wife's like, why didn't you talk to me? We have an event that night. And so I actually had to leave the draft in the 23rd round, and I had to finish the draft while I was driving, which I don't recommend. Do not do. That is dangerous, but I did it. So I didn't have the opportunity to, be scrolling through the draft room and going, okay, who can I take that might luck into saves? So I know that I'm going to be looking for saves in season. It is just something I'm going to have to deal with, unfortunately. But thankfully, saves come onto the wire, and I will just have to kind of play in that pool with everybody else. Not something I like to do. I wish I'd taken Bednar earlier, like I said, and then I could have taken a Chapman or a Hendricks as kind of a third kind of closer gamble. But yeah, definitely I think my biggest mistake of the draft was waiting too long on that second relief pitcher.
Yep. By the way, do we know when the ADP report for the Earth Leagues will be up on the NFBC site? Because right now it's showing blank.
Apparently they're not going to be able to do it this year. So I'm going to have to probably build something from scratch.
Well, I'm happy to help build if we could get the results. If somebody could get the running list, not the board like this, but the running list, I'm happy to help. It's just curious to see where different guys went and what's always fun. We were having this discussion at Wharf because what Morgan won, we went to look back at where I forgot who he picked in the 19th, 20th round. He made two of the best picks of the entire draft, and they were the 19th and 20th round. We were sitting there looking back wow, these guys broke out and he took them way down here type of situation. So it's always good to take a look back to see where some of these guys were going and just some of the range across the, what are there, 10 leagues?
Yeah, something like that. 8 to 10 at this point. So it's a cool little look at 80, a different ADP where it's we don't have a lot of 15-team fab leagues to kind of look at this point. We have draft champions, we have some OCs, but we don't really have the 15-team fab leagues to look at. So that's why I kind of like that all the Earth leagues are drafting, in February this year to kind of give people an idea of where things are going to be as we start to head into March and next week, really.
Yeah, I have labor on Friday night. Hail Labor is on Friday night. It's online, unfortunately, this year, but I've got that. And first pitch Arizona, first pitch Florida is online this weekend, and so I've got a couple of things to do for that. And then March kicks off next weekend. So, but yeah, I did the DC 50, which was 50 rounds with a 55-second clock. I did that on Monday night. That's the first time I had done one of those this season. I forgot how quickly those suckers fly by. And it was cool because the first ever commissioner I played under was randomly assigned to that league. So I'm looking at like my league filled about an hour before the draft. I'm looking names. And so I text him, I'm like, is that you? He goes, yeah, why? I'm like, we're in a league together tonight. We drafted 55 minutes. So it was cool to draft with Drew with that. But yeah, that flew by. And then I have this Thursday night, I have a RotoWire online championship if it fills. So I have that going on as well, which would be a completely different draft strategy with a 12 team where a lot of churn and burn to get through it. You're on mute. Insert Paul joke here.
Yeah.
What's an episode?
I keep doing that. One of the other guys that I pushed up the ADP was Jeffrey Springs. I know that I did. Yeah, like I think this is like, and actually I think my biggest 3 pushes up the ADP were all pitchers: Jeffrey Springs, Jose Barrios, Cody Bradford. I definitely.
To be fair though, they weren't massive pushes. Honestly, it's the 43, 38, and 32. So 2 to 4 rounds, but I didn't really call it out because I love where you took Bradford. I love the Bradford pick. You guys talked about Bradford on the starting pitcher preview. And where you ended up taking him towards the back end, it's a great upside pick in the 21st. And when I saw where you took Barrios, and you've said Springs is your most rostered pitcher all winter. So again, not a surprise. But Barrios, I just figured that was getting back to our axiom of value and volume that we've talked about a few times. He's one of the guys, almost the poster child for that type of guy. And last year he won 16 games for a 74-win team, but he will give you the volume. And I don't know if you would have loved to have Eric Getty if he was still there, but he went just before you. But yeah, when I look at him at a 14, I didn't feel bad about those reaches. I just pointed out that, you took him a little higher than needs, but if pitching's flying off the board, starting pitching as it had in this draft overall, these prices weren't out of line.
I had a really good conversation with Jason Anthony, who's a big time NFBC guy, and Brandon Waddle, who's another NFBC guy who are in the league. And we were talking about what wins leagues and overalls in NFBC is volume. Like it's, I think a lot of people think that to win these overalls, you got to get risky and you got to I got to take these risky picks and they all got to hit. And that's how you win the overall. And that's really not how it's done. If you look at a lot of these teams that have won, especially the 15 team overalls, it's because they just volume their way to victory. And my starting rotation is pretty boring. From my SP1 to SP5, I've got Pablo Lopez, Bailey Ober, Christopher Sanchez, Zach Eflin, and Jose Barrios. That's a pretty boring start to the rotation for the most part, but they're all guys who can volume. They're all guys who can, they may not have the, highest strikeout rate from a, K percentage perspective, but they're all going to throw 160 to 190 innings. And I'm just going to volume my way there. And that was kind of my strategy. And while I probably could have waited around on Barrios, I felt like he was kind of a line of demarcation in terms of good, solid innings right there. The guys who go after him, Taj Bradley, I think he's really interesting, and he was definitely a guy that I considered at that spot. But do we know exactly how many innings he's going to throw or how good those innings are going to be? Mackenzie Gore has been up and down. Darvish, has dealt with injury issues. Clark Schmidt is really interesting. I love the upside there, but
the new kick change, baby.
Yeah, I definitely could have gone those directions, but
that's Clay Holmes, the kick change. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, that's right. I definitely could have gone one of those directions, but I felt like Barrios was the last guy where I can pretty easily pencil in 160 plus innings.
Oh man, seeing Eno taking Bradley and Suarez like I did, boy, I feel really good about those 2 picks now.
Eno was funny, man. I will be doing a full full barf breakdown of the entire every team in barf on the Friends of Fantasy Benefits podcast probably tomorrow night, and we'll also talk about Glarf since Dave is in that league. But this was a really interesting draft because I've mentioned pitching went really, really fast. At first, it was, you had just the Google schemes in the first round, the back end, pretty standard. But by the time we get to the 7th round, there is just a crap ton of pitching that has gone off the board. And it really left, I think came into the league with a strategy of, hey, like, I know pitching, I'm going to get my pitching later. But he, it became kind of a meme for him, like, where he was screaming, like, I'm never taking a pitcher, because the pitching just went way too fast for anybody. I think it's probably hard for him to be next to Dalton Del Don, because Dalton went 6 pitchers in a row from round 4 to round 9.
But I've been in a draft with Dalton and seen him do that exact same thing. Yeah.
And Dalton said that wasn't his plan, but it just kind of fell that way, and he liked the values of the guys he got. And I mean, I love Dalton's start to his rotation. Michael King, Joe Ryan, Aaron Nola, and then Spencer Strider. That's like, when you get Strider as your 4th, I think that's a pretty worthy gamble right there. So it was a very interesting draft. But yeah, I wouldn't look at like the ADP from Barth and go, oh, this is how my league's going to go, because I think it was all over the place.
Oh yeah. I mean, just in the spreadsheet that you'll have in the note, just look at the difference between the two. And I just showed how you and I did compared to ADP. And early on, it was, we're pretty good early on. I made us, the Robert Suarez and the Lane Thomas reached in the first 2, and you had Royce Lewis and JT Realmuto. Then we got to the middle of the pack, and you were like, I don't care anymore. And then by the time I got to the end, I'm like, YOLO, just give them to me. Let me go grab who I need and go. So it's like we went different routes, and you driving in the car explained some of your reserve picks, because you truly didn't know who was still there. And you were going to cut them anyhow.
Yeah, and that was part of it. It was like, hey, I figure I'm going to cut a lot of these guys. I kind of end my draft. So from rounds 23 on, I take Brian Hayes. I mostly take Brian Hayes because CI really dried up at that point. I mean, it was like there was no one, and I needed someone who could cover, or I needed a CI. And I was just like, and I do feel like Brian Hayes is kind of a forgotten man at this point in his career. I know that injuries have been a big issue for him, but we're also talking about a guy who's just 28 years old and just turned 28 years old. But that being said, like, hey, he's an easy drop if he's not healthy. Then I took Jacob Wilson. I needed a shortstop. Again, shortstop had dried up at that point. And I was like, okay, at least Jacob Wilson will give me batting average, right? Like, I don't know if he's going to give me much of anything else, but batting average was something it's really hard to find late. Wilson's one of those guys. Then I took Pavin Smith. I needed a guy who could cover first base if something happened to Olsen. I was excited about Pavin Smith, but actually, like, now that like the signing of Perdomo to a long-term deal kind of muddies the water in that infield a little bit, with Lawler being fairly close to being ready. I feel like Pavin Smith's going to get Pavin Smith again, which is like he's probably going to end up back in the minors or as a bench bat at some point early on. But again, I didn't have the opportunity to kind of like scroll through and see who was available. I did grab my boy Max Meyer. I had no problem taking him in the 26 rounds. That felt like good value. I know his ADP is outside like the top 450, which means he shouldn't be drafted in a league like this, but I think that's just wrong. And I think it will move up as draft season goes on. And then Lamont Wade Jr., like, I love Lamont Wade Jr. Like, I know he's kind of going to be on the strong side of the platoon, but the team has said he is going to lead off. And so, like, for me, like, to get him in the 27th round felt really, really good. Freddie Furman.
Yeah, to get a leadoff hitter that's not on the white. You also took Mike Tauchman. That spoils the get a leadoff hitter that's not on the White Sox joke. But but you got 2 leadoff hitters in the reserve rounds. So more power to you.
Yeah, just kind of adding to guys that I think if I was gonna if I would have done something different here, I probably would have loaded up on some more relievers. Kind of in the back end and gone like, okay, I'll know by the spring training and when FAB starts, like if these guys are actually in a role or not. But ultimately, I like all the guys I got in the reserve rounds. I just don't know if I needed to make some of these picks.
Well, like I said, easy. They could be your first cut. Makes it easy.
Yep. Should we talk about some of the biggest bargains I got from the first 23?
Yes, we could look. I mean, when I look at showing, if I switch back over to let me take over a screen, just so people,
Mm-hmm.
those watching it, can see, and if I can come back over here. So bargain wise, we already talked about your first two, but then down towards the bottom, when I look at the guys that I have in green, so Roman Anthony, you were able to get him about 2 rounds later than his ADP. I know there's been a lot of uh, with the Bregman signing, that obviously moved the needle compared to where Roman Anthony went in Wharf compared to where he went in Barf. That was a needle, but a chance you were willing to take. You mentioned Max Meyer and Cody Bradford, ADP wise, he went way over ADP in Wharf. You got him almost a little over a round later that you got him in that he went in Wharf, but you didn't really talk about. I'd like to hear more about Anthony from you in particular, because that obviously the big event kind of clouds where he's going to play. We don't know what Boston, all of a sudden that Boston lineup is really, really deep, and the excitement about Christian Campbell and Roman Anthony. What are your thoughts with Anthony?
So I think Christian Campbell is the one that kind of obviously gets screwed a little bit, especially if Devers isn't going to be willing to move over to first or DH. I think eventually they will figure that out, right? And I think that Devers will eventually be probably just their full-time DH. But this outfield, outside of Jarren Duran, it's got Wilyer Abreu and Ceddanne Rafaela. That's, and Rafaela can play the infield. He can come in and play shortstop if and when Trevor Story gets hurt. And you look at their bench, it's still got Rob Refsnyder, Romy Gonzalez. I think this team really should give Roman Anthony a shot. I don't know if he's going to get a shot straight out of camp. And
Right.
He did get hit with a pitch on his very first pitch in spring training. And then
So did Chris Bryant in workouts. Yeah. Chris Bryant got drilled.
Yeah, and he had to miss the game on Friday, but he played, I believe, yesterday. So I think Anthony is one of these guys that all of a sudden, the hype has disappeared. Last year, people started taking guys Wyatt Langford, and I'm trying to remember who the other big outfielder was, but they started pushing them up into
Evan
the top
Carter.
60. Evan Carter, they started pushing these guys up into the top 60 picks. And for some reason, Roman Anthony is dropping. And I think Roman Anthony is the most likely guy to win the AL Rookie of the Year. And at this point of the draft, I'm pretty sure I've got 2 outfielders. Oh, no, I actually had more. I had 4 outfielders. Wow. But I really kind of didn't love the look of my outfield. I had Soto, Stephen Kwan, JJ Bleday, and Jacob Young. And I'm kind of I need some upside to kind of balance the rest of this outfield out. And I knew I could get a guy like Mike Tauchman later, right? Where he's not being drafted at all in 15-team standard leagues. He's going to be leading off. I don't know how long that'll last in Chicago, but it'll be enough time where I can stash Anthony. And I didn't take any stash players, guys who are already injured, or guys who were going to start the years off in the minors. So I felt like, if I need to stash Roman Anthony for a month, I can, but I'm sure he's going to be up by the end of April, if not on the opening day roster. And so for me, I felt like this was a really, really worthy gamble when we're talking about pick 323.
I can definitely see the upside in it. When I look at things, Rafael is the one I can't figure out, because from the skills perspective, the fact that he rarely walks and strikes out as much as he does puts him at such an extreme risk, but his defense is what can really keep him in the lineup. And so that's where if he struggled defensively, then it'd be an easy just move him down. But they're also paying him rather well too. So it's he's got a very, very long leash. And as long as he's in the lineup, looking over that depth chart, Abreu did really well. And Abreu can't hit lefties to save his life, but Abreu did really well against righties. So kind of as you were saying with Lamont Wade Jr., that was kind of Abreu's younger version of that. And Yoshida's the clog. That's the problem. He needs to be off this roster, but that contract is not easy to move. And if they got him off this roster, I could be more excited about this. It's a good overall team, but his inflexibility, needing to DH and keeping him out of the outfield, is a problem that they likely regret signing the contract they did, and the fact they can't move him out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think here's the thing with Boston, though. They're one of the few organizations that I feel like will eat money. Like, we've seen them do it before with,
Rusney Castillo.
Rusney Castillo, where like he just did not play in the majors really, in spite of the fact they were paying him, I think, like $50 or $60 million.
I think it was 72 million. I want to say it was this crazy contract, and he had 337 career plate appearances with 7 home runs.
Yeah, I mean, Yoan Moncada, very, similar. Like, they're not going, like, this is not a team that, like, I think they get the idea of like dead money. Like, they're just gonna have some dead money on this roster at times. So like, I don't think Yoshida is stopping Roman Anthony from coming and playing. And I think the fact that they want to move Devers to DH, I think is indicative of that. And so if people are afraid because Yoshida's on this roster that they shouldn't draft Roman Anthony, I think that is a mistake. I think Roman Anthony will be up when he is ready. And if he's ready to start the year as an everyday player, I think he does.
So to the point about dead money, how I mentioned that Castillo was 6 years, $72 million when they finally cut him loose. That's how much money Yoshida still has coming his way. Yeah. So the Red Sox eventually had to say enough was enough with Castillo, but they signed Yoshida to a 5-year, $90 million deal, and they're only 1 year. This is the second year of that deal. That's how much money, and that's why it's tough. He's on this roster for at least another season because nobody's eating that much money unless they could find some way to trade and say, take this guy, give us anything, and we'll take it.
They were trying to trade Cassis with Yoshida, and nobody was going to bite. And so, that's it's an interesting situation. So, any other questions about? We talked about Liam Hendricks. We talked about Manuel Clase. Overall, like I said, I feel kind of mediocre about this team. I definitely have a lot of work to do in Fab. I do like, we hadn't talked about my Jacob Young pick. Really like that pick. Especially at that point, I felt like I needed some extra speed and batting average. He's also jacked for some reason coming in.
I saw that. Yeah, he and Stone Garrett. I sent you, Paul and Ito, that picture of Stone Garrett. Those two guys look like they should be a WWE tag team at this point.
Yeah,
and then Jacob Wilson. I'm looking at note. Jacob Wilson's added 15 pounds this offseason, so maybe he now weighs $160. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, this isn't my best showing of a draft, but it is my first real draft of the season. So I'm hoping I improve from there. I think that's going to do it for this episode. I want to remind everybody where to reach on social media and plug any work you got going on.
So on Blue Sky, hit me up there, and then at Jason Collette .bsky.social, and then I have I mentioned the RotoWire Online Championship. 5 of the 12 spots are filled. There's still 7 more spots. That draft is on Thursday night. I do have a couple of panels, a couple of things I'm doing for the First Pitch Online forums this weekend. I want to say it's Saturday. I have the AL Labor Friday night, and I believe that people will be able to follow that live if they want to get on YouTube. I forget exactly how they're doing that. And then Saturday, I have to talk about it. I got a panel, got something Sunday afternoon. You and I will be talking Sunday morning, probably about my AL Labor team. And I think that's about it. I don't think I'm missing anything else. It's been a crazy couple of weeks between the driving, because the draft last week, work-wise, I've been all over the state of South Carolina last week, and I'm doing it again this week. But good news is Whataburger's in a few places in South Carolina now. So I had some lunch there on Friday, and I'm going to have some lunch there tomorrow, and yay.
You can reach me on all social media platforms, Justin Mason, FWFB. I am going to be working on projections all week. I have to finish my projections by the end of the week. So that is going to be my main goal. I'm also going to be writing a few articles, I think, over at Fantasy Pros and at Fangraphs as well. So definitely check out all that stuff. Oh, and the Friends of Fantasy Benefits podcast back up and rolling again. If you like a 3-hour podcast, that is what we do. So for Jason and myself, thank you for listening. Have fantastic baseball spring training.
Yeah.